Hi again, everybody. I'm Ted Sobel. He's Ron Marmalefsky. We are the Inside Blitz, and we are starting a whole new podcast talking football for you. And it's going to be a lot of fun, Ron. It's something that we've talked about for a long time, and it's an opportunity to go over the entire National Football League week by week. We'll do a team every week leading into, well, I guess that would be a few months from now.
Yeah.
And maybe a little bit later on as well, we'll do division by division. And also, of course, next week, a preview of the Super Bowl. Great to have you on.
Well, it's exciting to share the stage with you here. We've known each other for a long, long time, over 40 years. And during that time, we've taken different paths, but our love of football has never wavered. Our love of sports has never wavered. So the perspectives that you're going to offer and that I'm going to offer, they're kind of interrelated. But then again, they're up close and personal for you and they're behind the computer screen for me. But hopefully a lot of good knowledge is going to be brought forward as we go through each of the 32 teams over the next couple months.
And today we're going to start out with the San Francisco 49ers. But before we get to them, let's introduce ourselves. I am Ted Sobel. I'm with Sports USA Radio Network. We do NFL doubleheaders every single Sunday. We've added the NHL as well. But as far as the National Football League is concerned, I do the pregame show, the halftime, the postgame show. I do interviews with most teams to get at least one player per team each week. So that tends to be 4 players per week I get to interview. And to me, that gives me sort of an insight on where they're coming from, obviously from a personal standpoint, but from a professional standpoint as well. And so this is my 18th season, just about to start with Sports USA. Before that, LA radio before the dinosaurs were here. 23 years with KFWB radio and KNX for decades as well. KMPC was the first all sports radio station in Los Angeles, and I started with them in the late 1990s. And so I've been around a long time, covered everything from whether it's many Super Bowls or certainly Stanley Cup Finals, National Basketball Association championships, NCAA Final Fours, football and basketball, Wimbledon, the Masters, you name it. I've been there, except for the Kentucky Derby. One of these days, I'm going to get there. But it's great to be able to mesh the knowledge and just talk about our opinions and what we think has happened and might happen coming in next season.
And before I do my little intro and bio, I should also mention that you are now a published author.
That's true. And thank you for reminding me.
Yeah.
Touching Greatness. It's available on Amazon. It's a memoir talking about my life growing up in Southern California in the 60s, a lot of non-sports, music, entertainment stuff, and then leading into all sports. And I do have a chapter on only football and covering the Super Bowl and some fun stories with Eli Manning, David Tyree, and we'll get into that one of these days very soon because that was one of the all-time great stories that we got to be a part of.
So my name is Ron Marmalefsky. Most of you have never heard of me before, but if you follow me on Twitter, I've become a little bit more active and a little more visible over the last year or so. But that doesn't mean I haven't been involved in football for the last 40 years. This upcoming draft that we're leading into as we talk about looking back, looking forward at all of these teams, this will be the 43rd draft that I will write about.
Wow.
So I was writing about it while there were green computer screens and writing about it before the internet was around, sending it to teams at one time, getting on radio stations every once in a while, but mostly being behind the scenes and preferring it that way. In terms of the handicapping that I was doing and the wagering I was doing, I was guarding my trade secrets for years and years and years. I've networked much more over the last 10 years or so with people in the industry that are very visible on Twitter and very visible with their own websites and different handicapping methods and draft reports and so on and so forth. And the new networking that I've done just in the past few months has brought me to a group of people that has kind of made me want to share more of my thoughts and ideas. I've been writing NFL season previews for 30 some years. And not only the college draft, covering the draft, but NCAA season previews, just finished a 30-something year of another bowl report don't get to all the bowls anymore. There's too many meaningless ones, but did write about 30 or so of the bowls, 4 of which were canceled, but that's a different story. And I've been now submitting my work. I've had my work out there for a few years, just on and off, but now I've written a couple articles for Oddsbreaker, and I've been on different other avenues. I've taught a course on NCAA football handicapping. So this is the start of me joining Ted maybe in front of the mic a little bit and being more visible to the audience and sharing some of my ideas and thoughts. And what better way than to do it with somebody I've known for so long.
Yeah, and not only that, let's tell the people too, Ron, that we used to do an annual trip to Las Vegas when it was in our lifestyle and in the right time of what was going on. We covered a lot of stuff from the early days, going to sports books and learning about what the ins and outs of gambling football as well. I mean, this was something that it was really on the early stages of offshore books and what you were allowed to do and what you weren't allowed to do, the early proposition bets. I mean, we were there right from the start. And I think there's a lot we can pass along, especially when we get into next week, talking more about the Super Bowl. I got a feeling a couple of prop bets might come up.
Well, I mean, you and I have some stories we could share. We were there making last minute calls 30 minutes before kickoff, before Urban Meyer's Utah team was playing, and we pretty much projected an undefeated season.
Yeah.
And took advantage of that. And years before on my own, I used to take the Greyhound bus or drive just to get to legendary bookmaker Bob Martin's opening line so I could bet the Ivy League before the lines changed, because there are stories to tell about the Ivy League too.
Oh, yes.
That's digressing a little bit. And so we'll fast forward to 2022, and here we go.
Yeah, I could drop one little note in there as well too, because one of our trips to Vegas, and you remember it like probably it was yesterday, was when Kurt Warner became.
Oh God, you're killing me!
He became the first starting quarterback that nobody ever heard of in Rams history, and it's really funny. I met with Kurt just a couple of days ago at the Rams game, and he might come on one of my podcasts. I don't know about this one, but after the season is over, we'll talk about that. But it was we'll never forget that. I mean, that was just an unbelievable time when the starting quarterback went down, and it was like, okay, well, Dick Vermeil's team, they got no chance here. What are they going to do? And the over-unders were changing, and we loved one way and went the other way, and before you know it, they won the Super Bowl.
Yeah, we could share that story. I'll just put a little tease in there, is that we went on that trip specifically at my request to bet the Rams with Trent Green as quarterback. I had them at 50-1 to win the NFC Championship game. I couldn't get out of that bet, so that was good.
But I think he got hurt like within a couple of days of that.
No, right? That day. We were there on Saturday. It was Saturday night.
That's right.
We were just sitting at the bar. We were
sitting
somewhere. It was after the game, and we had no idea. The news ticker was going, and Dick Vermeil was crying on the air, which
he always did anyway.
He was bound to do.
Yes.
And it was such stunning news, and I was so disheartened because Trent Green went down, and as much as we followed football for years, we had no clue who the next man up was.
Yep.
And the world didn't know.
Well, unless you were worked at a market with him, you had no idea who he was. But it's a great story. And now it's a movie, right?
Oh, yeah, that's true. I haven't seen the movie, though.
Yeah, me neither.
Let's get started. I want to throw it to you first. With San Francisco, this is our first team and a kind of our trial run as we go through and look at the teams. We're going to look backward, look forward, like we said. And so, Ted, let's start by throwing it to you and saying, what did you like about San Francisco this year?
Well, first of all, they finished 10-7 in the NFC West. It's usually a tough division anyway. Now it was tough in a different way because Arizona was much better than we all expected, and Seattle was much worse. So that sort of, I guess, evened itself out. But it definitely affected what San Francisco had to do for the long haul to get into the postseason. And they only squeezed in because of that Week 18 come from behind win. So they were really fortunate there. And the Rams blew it, which they almost did twice in the postseason. That's why when we get to that Super Bowl, we're going to talk a lot about like their possibility of blowing games. But San Francisco, they weren't that good at home. They were 500 at home, so it was nothing special. They had a losing streak early in the season. I think they lost 4 in a row. So it was like, okay, this team is going to be a disappointment in my mind. And Kyle Shanahan was, to me, overrated. Going into the season, I've not been a giant fan of his. To me, it was, he's a creative guy and he comes with like a lot of good offenses, but I don't like necessarily the way he's calling games as you go along. But you got to give him a ton of credit because he's the one. And for the second straight year, we were seeing running backs go down, whether it was the first game or early in the season. I mean, they didn't have their normal share of a running game. And that's what Kyle Shanahan likes to do, like his dad. And it's like, okay, well, what do we do? And he figured, I'm going to use that guy named Debo, and I'm going to use him all over the place. And it screwed up everybody's heads in the league. And this guy's turned out to be the most unbelievable all-around player you ever want to find. And that's due to a lot because of the creativity of Kyle Shanahan. So to me, it looked like San Francisco had no chance to make the playoffs in the middle of the year. And then they came on late, and I got to give them all the credit. And a lot of that, to me, also goes to their offensive line. And in the trenches, that was the difference in Week 18 against the Rams. They changed the second half. They dominated them physically. And I didn't know if they were capable of doing that. And we're talking about normally a physical Rams team as well. And the Rams look like they're a high school team in that one. So to me, a lot of credit goes to Shanahan for turning it around. He turned my mind around on him, but I still don't totally trust him when it comes to the play-by-play of calling the game.
I'm going to say a few things, then ask you to take over because I got to plug my computer in a little bit. My poor battery is going here
please plug
as we go. I don't want to cop out early, but preseason expectations of San Francisco were simply that they had the 4th place schedule. They were almost co-favored or favored in terms of the league, and then they had these injuries and they were forgotten for a little while. But Jimmy G proved to be an accurate quarterback. D'Amico Ryans, their defensive coordinator, learned on the job, and he got better and better, exceeding my expectations for him. You mentioned Deebo Samuel, who assimilated very well in terms of what was going on. A lot to like about the team because they're creative, they run the ball well, they script the first 15 plus plays, and they do that, and they get out to leads. The adjustment part, not as good as we've seen in the past, and not as good from third quarter to fourth quarter in end game situations.
Running back Kyle Juszczyk, and I'm sorry, I had some audio go off.
Okay,
go ahead.
And in this particular scenario, if they had the ball last, they could make it work because of their offense. If they didn't have the ball last, it was hit or miss. But basically, they righted the ship and they found new ways and creative ways to get better. In the end, they probably met, not exceeded expectations. And therefore, they deserved to be in the playoffs. They acquitted themselves well in the playoffs. But when I throw it back to you, and as I plug in my little computer, talk about what you didn't like about what you saw. Maybe not only last week, but some things that bothered you regarding San Francisco's play.
Okay, I'm not so sure that I liked what Kyle Shanahan did with the team throughout the middle of the season. I thought he made a lot of questionable calls. I'm not sure that he was confident in his offense as well. I was very impressed with their defense, especially in the second half of the season. But in the middle of the year, I had my doubts about what they were doing offensively. And obviously, you're limited with Jimmy G. He's good to a point, but not to a high point. And, I thought he's actually sort of the right guy for them because you didn't have to rely on the passing game. Shanahan prefers to run anyway. So he was a good manager of the game. And until he got hurt late with the thumb, I thought he was doing an efficient job, but I just don't know if I trust Kyle Shanahan when it comes down to play calling. And you know what? there's a little of that is sort of a carryover from his dad, because we used to talk about his father.
Mm-hmm.
I used to joke that Mike Shanahan didn't own a watch because he didn't know how to tell time, especially in the last 2 minutes of a game. That really affected a lot of things. Yeah, he won, he got a Super Bowl. Congratulations. But it doesn't mean he's a perfect coach or whatever. And I think his son takes after his dad in a lot of ways. I'm not sure that just the running game is going to get it done for San Francisco over the long haul. And they obviously need a number one receiver. They don't have one. They have a number 2B in Ayuk. He's probably the next best or the best guy on the team outside of George Kittle being a tight end. They need more of that. They need a couple of guys. But I think if they got that, and if Trey Lance works out, that's a whole different level they can get to. We'll talk about that shortly, I'm sure.
Yeah. When we get to that point, I'll give you my draft thoughts, and then you can go from there. As far as what I didn't like about them, the bottom line is the roster itself is not where it needs to be, and it was evident because this is a passing league. If you can't stop the pass, you're always in danger. The high correlation between pass defense percentage and whether or not you get in the playoffs and do something in the playoffs. And San Francisco allowed over 68%. Now, everybody passes over 60% these days. It's rare not to, but it's still a standard deviation off when you're 68%. And so that's something they have to work on. That's something where the efficient quarterbacks in the league were going to get their points. And then it was up to the offense to be creative enough to do what they needed to do. You even mentioned the home field, an average record of home field. It doesn't have the feeling of, they're going to run the table. They're not good enough. And the configuration and everything else, they have to be on their game all the time. And Jimmy G was hurt. And he had those problems, and it's certainly not going to judge him on the Green Bay game, because if you're hurt and you're playing in 0 degrees, you want to crawl under a rock and do whatever. So, no problem there. But I think it's much like Colin Kaepernick replaced Alex Smith because they wanted to do more. They were seeing, Harbaugh, to his credit at the time, was seeing the fact that running quarterbacks were now more of what today's football was all about. And then Alex Smith later got replaced in Kansas City by another quarterback. I think that's what we're seeing. We're seeing the beginning of the end for Jimmy G and the changing of the guard. And so, like you said, there was a ceiling for how high San Francisco went. They met it, but statistically, they had the resume of a playoff team. I can rattle off the sack ratios and so on and so forth. There's no need to do that. They made the playoffs. They deserve to make the playoffs. But for them to go a step further, they're going to have to take that next step.
Yeah, and as far as the pass D goes, that cost them a chance to the Super Bowl because they had the lead and they left some guy named Cooper Kupp, who had a decent season, wide open twice for touchdowns. And that's your ball game. And I don't get it. I don't know what those guys are thinking. I don't know what their schemes were, or even if they had one. But they're not doing enough to stop the one guy you say, we can't allow that guy to beat us. And he beat them bad twice. And that was the difference of the game. You win by 3 points. Good night, everybody.
The press defense is not for everyone. Not everybody has, they don't have the athletes to do that. San Francisco didn't have the athletes to do that. They rely on Joey Bosa and Nick Bosa and his 15 and a half sacks to get to the quarterback before the quarterback has time to see an open receiver. But Jason Verrett, a little guy who was hurt, well, he's hurt every year. Last year he wasn't, and he made a big difference in terms of their pass D. This year he got hurt. That's their press corner, and they don't have a press corner. So when we look at things, if I had to look at the first area that they need to address, it's actually cornerback. And it's that for a variety of reasons. They can't rely on Verrett. They have 3 or 4 free agents in the defensive backfield already. They're going to have to recalibrate who they have there. And it's not just the draft, but free agency. The one area I think they first have to address is the defensive backfield. After that, we don't know, but I had mentioned and tweeted that Jimmy G had played his last snap after he made that one throw that wasn't, they weren't going to win probably at that point anyway. But that was a reminder to the team and the organization that we can only go so far with Jimmy G.
Right.
And now they have to get Trey Lance up to speed. And there's a lot to like about Trey Lance, but he needs repetitions. and he's going to need a different style offensive line. They're short 2 now on the offensive line. And that's going to be an area, the second area that I think they're going to absolutely have to address.
Yeah,
you mentioned wide receiver.
Yeah, but if you get Mostert back, obviously, if he's healthy, and he's going to be a key, they got to have, it's going to be Shanahan's run game anyway, and specifically early next season, I think, because you don't want to put too much on Trey Lance's shoulder. So you want that running game. So they're going to need some healthy guys, but the Niners don't usually have healthy guys for very long in the running game. But going back, don't you think if they had a healthy Richard Sherman, I'm talking about like from 3 years ago when he played there, they might be in the Super Bowl right now.
They would be.
That one
short
guy,
answer.
That one guy would have made the difference last weekend.
Hey, look, Eric Weddle played 3 games. He led the Rams with 9 tackles last week. If he's eliminated, forget Beckham and all those other guys that came on halfway this season. If Weddle's not there, maybe one play is different.
Right.
So, yeah, certainly. I mean, it's weird to say that 6 teams that were eliminated in the playoffs were eliminated because of one play, but that's what happened over the last 2 weeks.
Right.
So, and with the Lance, you're going to need a different blocking scheme. You're going to probably scheme plays and run up some plays on your little napkins a little different. And they're going to be looking for maybe a different style blocker because Jimmy G was more pocket passer. We know that. And Lance has already shown the ability to scramble and run. Even in his 1-game sample size in the NFL, he ran for a considerable amount of yardage. So it's the kind of thing, those are the 2 areas that I think need the most attention. After that, you mentioned wide receiver and you talked about Ayuk. And we don't know what his ceiling is. I don't think it's number 1. It's number 2, like you mentioned. Now, Deebo Samuel.
Guy, right? He's quality, but he's not number 1.
No, he wasn't even number 3 at the beginning of the year. They challenged him and they put a couple of guys ahead of him and said he hadn't earned it and he had to work harder to get there.
And I guess he did.
They lit a fire under him and some guys react and he reacted positively to that. And Deebo Samuel can be the number 1, but I do agree they need a new number 3. Juwan Jennings did a nice job, but then they just didn't throw to him. And I would argue that I'd probably go for a new number 2 tight end. I know George Kittle was banged up a lot of the time, but nowadays tight end is such an important position. Having one quality tight end may not be enough, even if it's George Kittle.
Got my depth chart here from the Rams game the other night.
Okay. Yeah, there is another case of being right out in front of the camera.
Hey, by the way, did you notice my little Patriot shirt here from the AFL Patriots, the Boston Patriots? That's in honor of Mr. Brady saying, "Good night, everybody. I'm out of here."
Oh, okay. Well, we could go with that. So let's start off by asking you then, now that we've done this and we've said a little bit about what they need, what do you think are we're sitting here now before the draft, before Jimmy G is traded and so on. Yeah. What are reasonable expectations for 2022?
Well, it's a lot to do with the draft. I mean, we talk about this all the time, that usually makes or breaks your next year. If you do it smartly, you know what you need. And to me, they've brought in some quality guys, and I think they've got a solid base, but they've got to get, it's not that easy, a Richard Sherman type, a leader on defense that's going to be somewhere in the corner, that's going to do his job and be a leader there and make sure they don't allow somebody like Cooper Kupp to beat them in key situations. And I think you can add another good offensive lineman as well. But to me, if they're better, you've been doing this for 40 years. What kind of a draft do we have for number 1 receiver types?
Nothing San Francisco can handle because they don't have a number 1 pick.
Okay.
So that's the first thing. Trey Lance is their number 1 pick.
Okay.
So the good thing about this draft, and we're going to talk much more about this in the future, is that this is the deepest draft I've ever covered. Now, don't get me wrong. I would be skewered on Twitter if I said it's the deepest first round. It's not. Right. It's an average first round.
Yeah, but it goes for rounds and rounds, right?
Yeah, but you're going to find 3rd rounders in the 5th round and 5th round talent in the 7th round because of the super seniors and everything that happened with COVID and people staying in school and so on. We're not talking about 250 draft eligible players. We're talking 290. and we have a coach and GM that work very well together. They know how to work the trade board. They just have to hit their needs head on. They could get a solid wide receiver that's dropping in the second round, but that's not where I would go. I would go cornerback first, like you mentioned, somebody who could do some press and so on. And typically there's going to be about 8 to 12 cornerbacks that would be in the top 60 to 65 picks.
So they'll have
And
somebody.
They're going to have somebody who could. Cornerback to me is also the hardest position to learn because you can't get away with touching a guy anymore in the NFL.
Right.
So you've got some work to do. Patrick Surtain of Denver, what he accomplished this year was unbelievable because cornerback is just the hardest position. So they're going to get somebody, and he's not going to be quite ready for next year. But it's not going to be a first rounder unless they trade up to go into the first round. And if they do that, they would lose draft capital. And in this draft, I would want the team to take as many choices as they can, because if you have 8 picks, you have a chance to add 8 players that aren't going to be cut, right? Because the draft is so deep.
Wait a minute. I got to bring up one name when we're talking about the draft, because it could fit in. There's a guy named Jimmy G that might bring a couple of draft picks in too.
You're absolutely right. I think what you could look at is a Sam Darnold type trade, where you might get a second and a fifth, which I think San Francisco would jump for. To me, it might even be more like the back end of a Carson Wentz trade. You don't get the first rounder, but you get a third rounder that escalates to a second based on playing time.
Okay. So what about let's say if he goes to a Pittsburgh or a New Orleans? Are they in a position?
Two possibilities.
Are they in a position to give San Francisco the draft picks that they need to get these guys we're talking about?
New Orleans, probably not, because they squander picks as opposed to add picks. And Pittsburgh, they're not known for leaving draft picks alone, but they did with Micah Fitzpatrick, which was a great move when they got him out of Miami. So it is possible, if they think that Jimmy G is an upgrade from what they have. Now, he probably is, but is he enough of an upgrade to part with 1 or 2 picks? Yeah. That's a long and hard decision that Pittsburgh has to make.
But he's also as a starter, though, you're worth more than no matter how good you are. If they project you as the starter, you're worth something in the draft department.
Oh, yeah, especially with this draft, because the quarterbacks are unproven that are coming out in this draft. They're probably not going to add that. But if I'm Pittsburgh, I'm not doing the deal as we digress at Pittsburgh, because I don't have the offensive line in place to make it work. And that's a problem.
How about Denver?
If Denver has the offensive line, and Denver's going to shoot for the moon first. They're going to try for Deshaun Watson. They're going to try for Aaron Rodgers. They're going to settle for Jimmy G. So,
by the way, is getting Deshaun Watson shooting for the moon, or is that about to go down with the space shuttle?
I know, it might be shooting for Pluto, which we could digest. So Pluto is a planet.
That's a dangerous thing. I cannot believe, even though nothing would shock me, I cannot believe where we are today, and today is 12 days before the Super Bowl, how any general manager in this league who has an ounce of IQ could go and make a trade for Deshaun Watson right now, before we have no idea when or if he will play again.
4 words. It only takes 1.
I know, but who is this guy that's going to lose his job within minutes?
Yeah, well, 2 of them were fired already. We don't have to
exactly.
worry about it. So we won't have to worry about that part. One final thought about San Francisco for the future. They're going to play the 3rd place schedule. They went to the playoffs, but they were 3rd in their division. So they do get a 3rd place schedule, which is nice. They're going to get, I wrote it down somewhere here, the 3 uncommon opponents, meaning the 3 teams that the rest of their division, Arizona, the Rams, and Seattle will not play, are Miami with a new coach, Chicago with a new coach, and Washington with a new logo. So
the Commanders.
You can look at the Commanders. So
that just happened today, by the way. Today's news, the Commander. You know what? It's obvious. Whatever they called them, it's going to take time for us to get used to it. But I really got used to the football team. I like their helmets. I like their lack of a logo.
Yeah.
It was sort of a little bit of a high end soccer team kind of a thing, where in Europe where they're just the football team. I could have gone with that, but the Commanders, it's going to take me a while. I don't know what I think about that.
Yeah. But that's the good news, by the way. These three opponents I mentioned right now, San Francisco would be favored over all three, wherever those games were. But there will be one step back with the new quarterback, Trey Lance, I believe, and the lack of a first-round pick. They're going to have to do some work in free agency because he's just raw. He hasn't had meaningful games for 2 years, other than the one stint here. One step back, 2 steps forward. If they post too high of a season win total, there could be a lean that way. If we talk a little handicapping here, we might from time to time. So I would say San Francisco, I'm going to say 9 home games for them. NFC gets 9 home games. I think overall, I would be looking at a 9-8 and a fringe playoff team again right now. We'll revisit it after the draft. Lots to digest, but those are my final thoughts. Any other final thoughts on San Francisco?
Yeah, well, again, if they get a couple of pieces, and maybe even in a trade, maybe Jimmy G will bring in a player as well that will fit.
That's true.
And if they get the right guy and then draft a couple of guys that will fit like a perfect jigsaw puzzle, then I see them potentially, because I don't know, Seattle looks like they're sort of drowning right now, and we have no idea. Is Russell Wilson going to be there? I think Arizona played a little over their heads this year. I don't trust their head coach either. To me, if San Francisco makes a couple of really good moves and Kyle Shanahan continues to improve and does better than I think his ceiling is, I could see them as a 10-win team next year and a playoff team again. And then, once you're in, you got a shot. But if they're in the trenches, these guys keep you in the game. And if Trey Lance by next playoffs, if they're there, if he progresses the way they hope him to, they got a shot to do something. But who knows? You know more about Trey Lance than I do. I've watched some of the video on him. He's got potential. He's got the athletic skills. He's got definitely the arm. But the question is he accurate at this level? And how does he read defenses? And we're not going to know.
Absolutely.
And how are we going to know until we know?
Well, it's absolutely true. I think, summarized, we're probably mildly bullish on San Francisco that they can continue this because they have the coach and GM in place. They have the structure, style, and scheme in place. It's just hitting the draft and free agency just the way they want it, beating the opponents they should beat, and developing Trey Lance at whatever speed that happens. And even if it doesn't happen as fast as they want, if they see progress, then the future is going to be very bright.
By the way, speaking of the quarterbacks, I got a little sound to play for you from Kyle Juszczyk, who I spoke to about the middle of the season, talking about Jimmy G and then also late Trey Lance. So I hopefully the level is good here, the audio level. And here's about a minute and a half of that. We're with Niners running back Kyle Juszczyk and fullback. That's capital F for fullback. And how do you see how Jimmy G has handled the quarterback situation so far? And has that affected the room at all? Just like who's going to be the first stringer, even though your coach keeps saying it's Jimmy?
No, the only way that it's affected is I feel like it's pushed Jimmy to be even better. He's been even more focused, even harder on himself to go out there and improve every single day. I think he's handled it tremendously. I think he's become a better leader, and I think that it's translated into situations on the field that, all training camp, he had a lot of pressure on him, and he had to make plays in critical situations. And I think you've seen that in what he's been able to do in 2-minute drills and at the end of the game to lead us down the field there and score a touchdown to put us in the lead. So, if anything, I think Jimmy's come out better because of Trey's presence.
And how much has Trey Lance progressed since the start of training camp? And it's a lot about patience here.
Yeah, definitely about patience. And Trey has done such a good job of just being a sponge. Every day, he's always asking questions. There's no weird air between him and Jimmy. They're always together. And Trey's always listening on what Jimmy has to say. Trey's always trying to, pick the brain of veterans and just try to pick up a little something every single day. And, you see it out there on the field. I think he continues to improve. And, once he gets his chance, once it's, time for Trey, I think he's going to be a star.
Well, there you go. And I think, and by the way, that's courtesy of Sports USA, of course. I use that for one of my pregame shows, and it's posted online at the Sports USA Media, which is on the on Twitter, where you can get that at. But Kyle is one of these guys. He's not a computerized interview. Sometimes you talk to people, we give 110%, and they don't want to say anything. Kyle speaks his mind. He's real. I've spoken to him like 3 times already in the last few years. He's a really good guy to chat with, and I got the feeling from him that he likes what he sees in Trey Lance. But again, you don't know what you have until you see it. I think it tells you a lot that Kyle Shanahan went with Jimmy G for the entire run here because he felt, hey, the guy's not ready yet. We got to deal with him when he is, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's no problem with that. The best of the quarterbacks, Mahomes and others, sat all until the last game. So what does Mahomes have in common with Trey Lance? They each played one full game in their first season, and it didn't hurt Mahomes at all. And as long as Lance got his reps on the sideline and did a lot during the year, then he's gained some exposure to play in the NFL, and he'd be used in the preseason. We'll just see how it develops as we go through.
I got a question for you on the development of a quarterback, because as we know, growing up in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, it was always you sat for at least 2 years and sometimes more until you got a shot to be a starter. Now, I always think it's a different ball game from college because there are more pro offenses in college than ever. And it's not quite the transition to the NFL that it used to be, but it still is. And you still got to learn how to play defenses. The problem is, how much did you actually play in college? Did you play 2 years? Did you start 2 or 3 years? Or did you come out early and you still don't know what the hell a defense is, right? So where do you see Trey Lance here? I can tell you Aaron Rodgers told me a couple of times he hated it sitting behind Brett Favre. It turned out to be the greatest thing for his career to watch and sit. Maybe not 3 years, but that's just the way it went. And he was able to go right from game one.
Each situation is different. If you're drafted in the top 15, you're almost expected to start from day one. Certainly, we saw that with Joe Burrow. His team is Cincinnati. He's carrying them at a young age. As a rookie, he had to do the same thing. They only won a handful of games. Going back a ways, Troy Aikman, took his lumps. Peyton Manning took his lumps. All these people who were 1, 2, 3s, they're expected to start. Even this year, Wilson of the Jets, and we'll get to him later on, but he entered a situation that was completely no win for a billion factors. Right. But it's not a bad thing to take your lumps if you physically hold up and then you don't get gun shy as far as taking sacks and stuff like that.
Joe Burrow is a great example of that, right?
Yeah. So, David Carr,
Oh,
the brother Derek Carr, got sacked so much he was anticipating sacks instead of going through his progressions. So I would say there's no one way, but you can fix things. Even though Josh Allen wasn't ready at Buffalo, Buffalo's GM and Buffalo's coaching staff fixed it because of how they surrounded him with talent. So if they do the same thing with Trey Lance, and San Francisco is so much more advanced than Buffalo was with Josh Allen, or the Jets are right now with Zach Wilson. If they do the right thing, then Trey Lance's ceiling is just so high, it'll validate the big, bold trade that they made earlier this year.
Right. But do you agree, though, that because college has more pro offenses, that it does suit guys starting earlier in the NFL?
I think it's a two-way street. The NFL has borrowed some of college in terms of these mobile quarterbacks. If you look at the top 5 or 6 quarterbacks coming out in this year's draft, all but one of them are mobile. I mean, and they're using their legs more than they're using their arm. And that's what's going to make them be partially successful in the rookie year and not a total disaster, because a lot of them aren't ready. I mean, this is not a great year for top 10 quarterbacks but everybody's looking for a quarterback in this quarterback-driven league now. So you're going to overvalue them, and you're going to hope that because they've learned how to do the college game, and the NFL has learned how to do part of the college game as well. The NFL used to be reluctant to have running quarterbacks. There was a stigma attached to them. And now that's not the case anymore. So the marriage of the two has made it, the long-winded answer to your question is that basically you can develop a little bit faster because you've got a taste of the NFL in college already, whether it be through the running aspect or through the development of people who are more attuned to what the NFL and the college are doing at the same time.
Right. Last thing on this, I think that the injuries during the second half of the season to Lamar Jackson is going to start people thinking that's what we were worried about with this. He's great, but he's not great when he's on the sideline watching the game. And if this continues to happen with those kinds of guys, that they're worried more about the leg injuries, that could be a major issue when you decide, I want a guy who's mobile, but he's still got to be able to throw, and he has to be able to play. If he's not dressed, it doesn't help. You know what I mean? I think there's going to be sort of a happy medium in there over the next several years when more injuries come.
Okay, so we didn't talk about this at all. This just popped into your head probably right now, but this may be one of the most important points that we talk about, because
I was overdue, by the way.
Yeah, we don't know the answer to this because we're in an era. I mean, look at what's happened and what just happened. Brady retired at age 103 or 44 or whatever he was. Aaron Rodgers is 38, 39, and he's still going on. Drew Brees retired at 38, 39. Big Ben retired at those ages. Fitzpatrick, I think he's still going on, even though he missed this year or whatever. These are pocket quarterbacks who have had longevity. I'm curious as to whether or not any of these guys are going to make it past 33, 34 years old if they're running for the first 10 years of their NFL careers.
How about the late 20s? Forgetting the third. Seriously. Yeah. I mean, because if they've got to be more measured in how many runs they make and the types of runs, and also being able to slide when you need to. Mm-hmm. You start taking these hits, I don't care who you are, you're going to be on the sideline with the Band-Aids.
Well, sports medicine is better than ever before. People are coming back from injuries they never came back to. But these guys are taking hits, not just by one guy. Two guys could be hitting them. 600 pounds could be hitting them. And some of the body frames, I'm thinking of Kyler Murray of Arizona. I don't know how he makes it into age 34, 35,
I can't imagine it. I can't see it.
And we train better than ever before. I mean, athletes don't have an off season like they used to, where they just did whatever they wanted to do for 4 months out of the year, and then they had to play themselves into playing weight. That's gone. That's long gone.
Right.
But these mobile quarterbacks, that point that you made, it's going to be fascinating to watch the quarterbacks that are 25 right now, and they're all mobile, as they get to 28, 29, 30. Yep. Are they going to hit that running back wall that running backs get?
Exactly.
30 is a killer.
That's exactly what I'm thinking of. It's like, well, we can't have a running quarterback past the age of 30 because he's going to be like run out just like your typical old style running back.
Yeah.
He's only got so many miles in those legs.
Yeah, I mean, we have 17 games now, which is atrocious for player safety. We'll probably go to 18 on the next contract, which luckily is 8 or 9 years away. So you're playing more games per year, more hits per year, and it's just going to take such a toll on these guys. It's
and
crazy.
Longer playoffs as well. I mean, we're just going to continue to go on and on. And of course, you hope I'm the sore guy in the Super Bowl, but at the same time, I mean, that is not something that for the long haul, I don't think it's a healthy situation. And I mean, capital healthy.
Oh yeah. It's going to be something to watch moving forward. Well, I guess we'll keep our opinions to 2021, 2022, 2023, but it's fascinating to think of if we had any quarterbacks as we go through, because we do want to alert the audience that in the future, we're going to be talking division by division, and we may run into some of these quarterbacks that we have a question whether or not they need a second contract, whether or not the second contract is it for them, whether they should move on. We've got a lot of people in that medium category where they're bridge quarterbacks. They're not the quarterback that will take you to the promised land. And
their name
it's a
doesn't have to
fascinating
be,
discussion.
and their name doesn't have to be Bridgewater to be a bridge quarterback.
That's
right?
true. He's got a lot of play left in him, but obviously he has a ceiling in terms of what he can do, and he's got to be surrounded by an offensive-minded. Well, we could go on and on.
Right.
We have a lot of thoughts about Teddy Bridgewater and so on. But
By
next
the way,
week,
yes, next
it's
week
the
is
Super
the
Bowl.
Super Bowl. But before we go there, real quick, there are two more names I want to bring up about the Niners, and that's Deebo Samuel and Nick Bosa. Also, are expecting long-term contract extensions, and they haven't received them yet. Now the question is, what do you do there? You got to give it to Bosa, and you got to give it to Deebo, right? I mean,
there's no question, because Deebo is more important to that team. We've had this off-air discussion than any non-quarterback is to his team. If Deebo's not there, who scares you on that team when George Kittle is 50%, which is what he was the last 6 weeks?
Right. No doubt. So, I mean, I assume they're just going to sign those guys and everything's going to be fine, right?
I would.
Okay. Well, anyway, next week, we got the Super Bowl, baby, 56 in our own backyard. I've been to the last two Ram playoff games. I will not be at the Super Bowl. I don't need to be at the Super Bowl. I think chances are you and I are going to be watching it somewhere together, which would be fun. But at the same time, that's going to be a fascinating matchup. What I call the Rams, who squeaked their way in. They could have easily had one of the worst playoff losses ever at Tampa Bay. They barely came from behind against the San Francisco team that gave them a couple of free touchdowns, which we already discussed. And here they are, and it was an interception away by Matthew Stafford. It was literally handing this guy the ball. Tate, right? Is that his name? Tate on defense. Tart. I'm sorry, Tart, who dropped the ball, and forever he's going to be dying over that one because the Niners are probably in the Super Bowl if he catches that ball. Now here we are with San Francisco not there, but Cincinnati is there, and to me, I call it the worst offensive line in the history of the Super Bowl, and we'll talk a lot about that next week.
Yeah, so next week, I think what we'll be talking about are strategies, how each team can win the Super Bowl, what each team has to do to not lose the Super Bowl. I think we'll throw in 3 or 4 Super Bowl stories like we hinted at the beginning.
Definitely.
We'll talk some props. We'll talk some handicapping as well. And then we'll see how it all flows out once the Super Bowl happens. And a little bit after the Super Bowl, then we'll get heavy into the division previews.
Yep.
Before we quit now, tell them again where they can find you.
Well, they can find me at Ted Sobel Sports on Twitter and on Twitter. Let's see, where else? Where's my other page? Well, Touching Greatness is the name of my book on Amazon. You can also find it at touchinggreatness.com. And I have a lot of interviews on there as well that I've talked about the book, and I talk about sports in general. For example, I did a radio show yesterday on KJR in Seattle, and we talked a lot about the Super Bowl, and that is posted at tedsobel.com, which is the same at touchinggreatness.com. The plan is we're going to put this specific podcast on the Touching Greatness Facebook page. So look for it right there. And then we'll evolve throughout this, and we'll let you know what's going on. I can't wait for the Super Bowl. Ron, the bottom line is it was $12 for the first Super Bowl in LA at the Coliseum. And 56 years later, it is an average of $11,000 a seat. No, thank you.
Yeah, no, we won't be doing that. And you can find me. It shows right there at Ron A Sports on Twitter. Every once in a while, you'll see me on a podcast being invited on with some very good people, good handicappers in the business, good people who break down games and schemes. Maybe down the road, I'll have a YouTube page hooked up because Ted and I are going to try to do a little bit more of this as we go through, try to be more visible, teach a couple of courses down the road. In the meantime, we'll be back with you next week. Thanks for listening.
Good luck, everybody. See ya.